dawn broke over the plains of Arsuf on September 7th. The Crusader column formed up as it had for 6 agonizing days, battered, bloodied, but unbroken, just 5 miles to safety and the fortified camp. But the Muslims massed in numbers never seen before. This wasn't harassment anymore. Saladin had committed his entire host. 30,000 warriors flooded from the hills like a dark tide intent on drowning the Christians. The Sultan's deployment revealed his strategy with brutal clarity. Crush the Crusader rear guard, create panic, roll up the entire column like a carpet. His nephew, Taqi al-Din, commanded the right wing with 8,000 veteran cavalry. The center held 10,000 Mamluks under Saladin's direct command. The left wing deployed another 8,000 under Muzaffar al-Din. The remaining forces created a tactical reserve ready to exploit any breakthrough. You must understand what 7 days of arrow storms does to a warrior's mind and soul. The Hospitallers had watched brothers die unavenged for a week. They'd endured mockery from Muslim warriors who rode just out of reach, shouting insults in Arabic and French, challenging their manhood and courage. Master Garnier de Nobles gripped his reins with white-knuckled hands. His knights muttered prayers through clenched teeth, while their entire bodies trembled with suppressed rage. The first assault struck at 9 o'clock in the morning, not the usual harassment, but a coordinated hammer blow against the Hospitaller rear guard. Thousands of horse archers converged simultaneously, darkening the sky with arrows until noon seemed like dusk. The drumming reached deafening levels that physically hurt. Muslim cavalry charged to saber range, struck with slashing blows, then wheeled away before the heavily armored knights could respond. Hospitaller losses mounted catastrophically with each passing minute. Imagine yourself as one of these knights. You're already exhausted from 7 days of marching in hell. Arrows slam into your shield with impacts that jar your entire arm. Your destrier screams and dances as shafts seek its unarmored legs. You watch the knight beside you topple with an arrow through his neck, drowning in his own blood. Every warrior instinct screams at you to charge, to attack, to do something other than die slowly. But the trumpet hasn't sounded. The order hasn't come. Taqi al-Din himself led a cavalry charge directly at the Hospitaller standard, a calculated insult designed to break their legendary discipline. It nearly worked as intended. Garnier de Nobles saw nothing but red rage after 7 days of suppressed violence. "I can bear this no longer." The Hospitaller master's cry carried over the din of battle. Without waiting for Richard's signal, without orders or permission, he couched his 12-foot lance and spurred his destrier forward. His knights saw their commander move, and 2 centuries of discipline shattered. 300 Hospitallers erupted into a full charge without authorization. Remember, this number burned into history, 17 minutes. That's all the time it took to change everything. Richard saw the Hospitallers break formation prematurely from his position in the center. In 3 heartbeats, he faced the commander's ultimate decision: recall them and watch them die unsupported and alone, or commit everything and hope his trap had worked. Military genius reveals itself in split-second choices made under impossible pressure. The Lionheart didn't hesitate, even for breath. Now, bear aid to the Hospitallers. Richard signaled his trumpeters with a sharp gesture. 3 long trumpet blasts split the air, the sound every Crusader had been praying to hear for 7 agonizing days of torment. What followed wasn't merely battle, but mathematical impossibility made flesh. The entire Crusader cavalry, 2,000 knights, exploded into motion simultaneously. But this wasn't a disorganized mob charge born of rage. Even in their fury, after 7 days of restraint, discipline held firm. They maintained perfect formation as they accelerated. Hospitallers on the right wing, Templars on the left, Richard with the English and French forming the center, 3 iron wedges of armored death accelerating toward the Muslim line. The ground shook under 8,000 hooves as 200 tons of steel and horseflesh reached full gallop. The Crusader war horses, destriers, bred specifically for this moment, carried their armored riders at speeds that seemed impossible for such weight. The Muslims had witnessed charges before in 100 battles, but never like this. This wasn't a normal cavalry charge. This was 7 days of suppressed violence, of helpless rage, of unavenged deaths released in a single explosive moment. The knights weren't merely attacking. They were unleashing every second of frustration, every moment of torment, every dead brother into the points of their lances. Impact velocity, 35 miles per hour. A mounted knight at full charge generates kinetic energy equivalent to a modern automobile crash. The 12-foot lances strike first with physics rather than mere combat skill. What happens in the next seconds is pure mechanical force, not swordsmanship. The lighter Muslim cavalry simply cannot withstand the mass and momentum of the Crusader charge. Their line doesn't bend or break, it disintegrates on impact like pottery struck by iron hammers. The first impact is only the beginning of the slaughter. Lances shatter on impact with bone and armor, but the knights don't slow for even a heartbeat. They draw swords and become killing machines in motion. The war horses themselves are trained weapons, biting and kicking and trampling anything in their path. Each knight forms the apex of a killing triangle. Rider above wielding steel, horse below crushing with hooves, momentum carrying both forward through flesh. The Hospitaller wedge punches through Taqi al-Din's right wing like a spear through parchment. Garnier de Nablos, first into the enemy ranks, personally cuts down 3 emirs in the opening minute. The Sultan had catastrophically underestimated one crucial factor: the psychological impact of releasing 7 days of compressed tension. The Hospitaller's rage had been building for a week of torment. Saladin gave them a target and permission. They don't just fight, they butcher with methodical fury. Muslim warriors who'd stood firm against ordinary charges break and run in terror. Richard's center wedge smashes into the Mamluk corps with the force of divine judgment. The Lionheart himself leads from the very front, his sword rising and falling in a rhythm of death. Eyewitnesses describe him as a giant dealing destruction with every blow, his blade never still. The Templars on the left wing, witnessing the success, adjust their angle with practiced precision. They strike the Muslim flank just as Taqi al-Din's wing begins its collapse. It's a hammer and anvil moment of perfect tactical execution. Muslims caught between Hospitaller fury and Templar discipline die by the hundreds in minutes. The pursuit transforms into methodical slaughter. Medieval battles typically ended when one side's formation broke, but Crusader knights unleashed after 7 days of enforced restraint don't want prisoners or ransoms or glory. They want vengeance, written in blood. Knights pursue fleeing Muslims for 3 miles until their war horses, exhausted from the charge and combat, simply cannot run anymore. Even then, crossbowmen continue picking off stragglers until Richard finally sounds the recall trumpet. From first impact to total collapse of Saladin's army, exactly 17 minutes by the sun's movement. The ground at Arsuf drank more blood in 1 hour than most battlefields witness in an entire day of fighting. When the killing finally stopped and silence fell, the impossible had become undeniable reality. The Crusaders had charged with 2,000 knights. They returned with 1,950, just 50 killed in the charge itself. Total Crusader casualties for the entire battle, including the morning's harassment, 700, mostly infantry. The Muslim dead carpeted the plain in windows where the charges had struck. 7,000 bodies in 17 minutes. At Hastings, armies fought from dawn to dusk to produce 7,000 dead total from both sides. At Arsuf, that was merely the Muslim toll from a 17-minute cavalry charge. The 10-to-1 kill ratio seemed like propaganda, but the corpses stacked in piles didn't lie. The counting began immediately. Richard ordered an accurate tally, partly to assess victory's completeness, partly to prevent disputes over looting rights. Frankish chroniclers walked the blood-soaked field with scribes recording numbers. They stopped counting individual bodies at 7,000. Some estimates ran higher based on the extent of the killing ground. Turkish sources later admitted to 5,000 elite cavalry lost, the cream of Saladin's military power. But Richard's next decision shocked everyone, including his own nobles who begged for permission to pursue. "We can destroy them completely! On to Jerusalem!" they cried, intoxicated by victory. The Lionheart refused with strategic clarity that transcended the moment's triumph. "No. We march to Arsuf as planned. We consolidate. We survive." Why refuse pursuit when Saladin's routed army could have been annihilated completely? Because Richard understood something his battle-drunk knights didn't grasp in their victory fever. The Crusader army was utterly exhausted. 7 days of marching, fighting, and dying had drained every reserve. The horses were blown from the charge. Pursuit into unknown hostile territory could transform triumph into catastrophic disaster through overextension. Discipline had won the day. Lack of discipline could still lose everything. The psychological shockwave from Arsuf rippled across the entire Levant within days. Saladin's carefully constructed aura of invincibility, built methodically since Hattin, shattered like his battle line. Emirs, who'd never questioned the Sultan's judgment, began whispering doubts. Garrisons that would have fought to the death started considering surrender terms. Before Arsuf, Muslim armies believed Frankish knights were formidable but ultimately beatable, bait them into rash charges, surround them with mobility, destroy them piecemeal through attrition. Arsuf proved with brutal finality that a disciplined Crusader charge, properly timed and fully supported, was literally unstoppable by any force in the medieval world. Saladin's own chronicler admitted in words preserved across centuries, "The Franks fought like demons unleashed that day." Their charge was, as the Day of Judgment itself, irresistible, terrible, final. Within weeks, Saladin agreed to negotiations he'd previously scorned with contempt. The Sultan, who'd sworn sacred oaths to drive every Frank into the sea, now offered truces and terms. Jerusalem, while never recaptured by Richard, became a point of negotiation rather than non-negotiable jihad. The road to the Holy City lay open. The battle revolutionized medieval military thinking across Christendom. Conventional wisdom had held that lighter, mobile forces would always defeat heavier knights through harassment and attrition. Richard proved that disciplined heavy cavalry properly employed remained warfare's ultimate shock weapon. European armies would study Arsuf's lessons for centuries to come. But Arsuf's greatest victory contained its own tragedy and limitation. Richard had proven Crusader arms could still dominate any battlefield. Yet he'd also proven something darker. Such victories required superhuman discipline and near-perfect circumstances. Few commanders possessed Richard's tactical genius. Fewer armies could maintain such restraint under pressure. The Lionheart's calculated restraint from pursuit, initially criticized by hot-blooded nobles, proved strategically brilliant. By maintaining iron discipline, even in victory's intoxication, he preserved his army intact and combat effective. The subsequent capture of Jaffa and advance on Jerusalem proceeded from a position of strength, rather than exhausted, overextended triumph. Richard earned his epithet Lionheart not through the charge itself. Any brave knight could charge when ordered. He earned it through the iron will that held that charge back for 7 agonizing days while his men died. True courage wasn't the attacking. It was the enduring, the waiting, the patience to spring the trap at the perfect moment. The hardest battles are fought not with swords and lances, but with patience and discipline that transcend normal human limits. At Arsuf on September 7, 1191, 12,000 exhausted Crusaders did indeed crush 30,000 warriors. Not through superior strength or numbers, but through the deadliest weapon of all, discipline, forged in 7 days of deliberate suffering. Richard the Lionheart didn't merely defeat Saladin's army on the coastal plains. He defeated the Sultan's entire strategic doctrine, his psychological warfare, his tactical system refined through decades. By transforming defensive suffering into offensive annihilation, by turning harassment into a trap, by choosing the perfect moment to unleash controlled fury, he gave the Crusades their single greatest battlefield victory. The age of Saladin's invincibility ended in 17 minutes on a blood-soaked September morning. But those 17 minutes of devastating violence had been purchased with 7 days of blood, sweat, arrows, and superhuman restraint that tested the limits of human endurance. In warfare, as Richard the Lionheart proved at Arsuf, final victory belongs not to the strongest or most numerous, but to those who choose the perfect moment to unleash hell itself. The knights who charged that day became legends, but the greater legend was the king who knew when to hold them back. If this story of patience, discipline, and perfect timing in the face of impossible odds inspired you, subscribe to Flow of History. We bring you the battles, the strategies, the moments where everything changed through one commander's genius. Hit subscribe now. The next story of legendary victory against overwhelming numbers is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it.